Thank you very much for joining me on this video. I appreciate your investment of time watching these videos week by week. I want to talk to you today about conditions in an offer, and specifically condition on sale of property and the accompanying escape clause. We've had an interesting market going all the way back to 2017. We've seen prices go up. We saw the heyday of the period of time during COVID when multiple offers were the norm. And during that period of time, sellers wouldn't generally entertain conditional offers. They said they didn't have to. And so a buyer, if they're serious about buying a property, had to come in one line, I'm willing to buy your property. Well, we've changed. Now we've come around the corner and now it's a buyer's market. It takes longer to sell a property. Sellers are more open to offers, and we're seeing conditional offers being now the norm. And generally, when we're talking about these conditional offers, they're not lengthy offers, conditions. They're conditional on financing. They're conditional on home inspection. They're conditional on maybe arranging insurance for the property, and they might be 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. And what the buyer is saying is, I don't want to risk you selling the house out from under me while I'm trying to arrange my financing or having a building inspection. And so the seller says, okay, here's my promise, but by this condition, I will basically remove my house from the market so that you don't have to worry about somebody else coming along and buying the house while you're trying to fulfill your condition. I'll tie up the house until that period's over. But the trouble is there's some conditions that can't be fulfilled in 3, 5, 7 days. Some of them are conditions for the seller. They might be conditional, for example, on probate of a will, or they might be conditional on severance. The property can't be sold unless these conditions are fulfilled, but they're going to take a lot longer. They might take 1 or 2 or 3 months to fulfill them. But there's also a condition in the favor of the buyer that can't be fulfilled 3, 5, 7 days normally, and that's the condition on the sale of the property. The buyer says, look, I want to buy your property, but I've got a house to sell, and all my equity's tied up in my house. If I can't free up the equity from my house, then I can't go ahead and buy your house. So I want to sell my house, but I can't do it in 3, 5, 7 days. In fact, right now, in our board, the average sale time is 44 days. And so the buyer says, I don't even want to cut it that fine. So I'm going to come in with a condition, I want 45 to 60 days to sell my house. Seller thinks about it and says, I haven't got any offers in place now, and a bird in the hands is better than two in the bush. I'm going to accept this offer. But I can't afford to have my property tied up where nobody else can look at it, nobody else can buy it, nobody else can bring in an offer for 60 days. So he said, I'll accept your offer, but we're going to put in what's called an escape clause. And what the escape clause is I have the right to continue actively marketing my property. And if I get another offer that I like, satisfactory to me, I'm going to notify you that I've got this other offer, and you're going to have a certain amount of time, usually 24, 48 hours, to either firm up your deal or walk away. And that's called an escape clause. Let me take a minute and read you a typical escape clause. It says, provided further, the seller may continue to offer the property for sale. And in the event the seller receives another offer satisfactory to the seller may so notify the buyer in writing by delivery to the buyer personally or in accordance with any other provision for the delivery of notice in this agreement of purchase and sale or any schedule thereto. The buyer shall have, and then we put in 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is, from the giving of such notice to waive or remove this or all conditions by notice in writing delivered to the seller personally or in accordance with any other provision for the delivery of notice in this agreement of purchase and sale or schedule thereto, failing which this offer shall become null and void, and the buyer's deposit shall be returned to him in full without deduction. Two specific words I want to draw your attention to in this clause. The first one is it says he will have so much time to waive any and all conditions. The AREA sends out approved clauses, and up until the 2022 formed clauses they sent out, they had in there not remove all conditions, they had remove this condition. And you got to be very, very careful here. You want to have in there all conditions, absolutely. Here's the issue. Let's suppose the offer's in place, sale of property, and the seller gets another offer that he's happy with. So he notifies the buyer, but in the buyer's offer, it says he's got 48 hours to remove the sale of property condition. But he's also got a condition on financing, condition on building inspection for 7 days. It generally says 7 days after the removal of the sale of property condition. So the buyer gladly waives his sale of property condition. The property is still tied up for 7 days. All the buyer is doing is hoping that he gets a sale on his property in the next 7 days. Meanwhile, the seller can't proceed with a second offer. The buyer of the second offer, the buyers come in, figures he's got the go-ahead after 48 hours. He doesn't. He's going to go ahead after 48 hours, yes, but an additional 7 days to find out whether that's going to be firmed up or not. So you want to make sure that it always says that when you notify the first buyer with a sale of property, once he gets the notification, he has to remove all conditions. But there's a second word I want to draw your attention to, and that is when he gets an offer acceptable to him, it says he may so notify the buyer. It doesn't say he shall, it says he may. Very important. And that's not a mistake. There's a very critical reason why it's may, but it can cause you a problem. We had a situation on more than one occasion, actually, where a secondary offer came in, 48-hour bump notice, and then we waited and waited and waited, and the agent didn't have the seller notify the first buyer. The reason why was the listing agent had his own offer in place, and he didn't want to bump it. And there's nothing we can do. The agreement of purchase and sale, the secondary one, says 48 hours from delivery of the notice. And so because the notice wasn't being delivered day after day after day, the second buyer was tied up, and it was just creating a problem. So you might want to say in your agreement of purchase and sale, the seller hereby agrees that upon acceptance of this offer, he shall immediately notify the first buyer of his receipt of acceptable offer. Move it along. But there's also times when the seller may not want to give notice at all. Let's suppose the sale of property offer is in place and a secondary sale of offer comes in, and the seller says, I don't want to bump the first one. For the second one, I don't know which one's stronger. I don't want to turn down the second one. Is there any way we can keep both offers in place at the same time, and whichever one sells first wins, and I've got twice the chance of getting my property sold? And the answer is yes, you can do that. You got to be careful how you word it. The secondary offer has to say, we acknowledge there's already a sale of property in place, and this offer comes into effect only after the first offer has been released. Otherwise, you're going to be careful. You're going to sell the property to two people at the same time. You don't want that to happen. But you can stack offers. And the reason you can stack offers is because it says he may, not he shall, notify. But there's the other situation I want to point out to you, and that's where the buyer who has a house to sell says, I only want to sell my house if I can buy this house. I don't want to be left out in the cold where my house is sold and I don't know where I'm going. And the listing agent advised the seller not to put in a relocation in the listing, conditional on the seller finding adequate accommodation within 14 days or something. So you're in that situation where there's a sale of property offer in place, and the seller has his property, or the buyer has his property on the market, and then he gets an offer, let's say conditional for 7 days on financing and inspection. Now he's got a problem. He says, well, what happens if I get a bump notice tomorrow? I've got 48 hours to either remove my condition and firm the thing up or walk away. If I firm up my condition and then the offer on my property doesn't become firm, I'm stuck buying a property when I don't have the equity because I haven't sold my property. On the other hand, if I walk away from this deal because I don't have my house sold absolute firm, and then my person that's buying my property goes ahead and removes conditions after the fact, I've sold my property, but I'm not buying this property. So what am I going to do? Derek Abrams brought it to my attention. He had it happen twice this past week. And what he did, and I thought it was ingenious, he came up with an amendment that he offered to the seller of the first property that says that, look, I as the buyer have received another offer that's satisfactory to me, conditional for 7 days. You hereby agree not to serve me bump notice until such and such a date. And the seller was okay with that, the buyer's comfortable with that, and life went on. Can you do it? Sure you can do it. Why can you do it? Because it says he may, he not the word he shall. So he gets an offer, and the buyer that had the sale of property, first sale of property, has 5 days left, so he just holds off giving the bump notice for 5 days, and then the buyer who's buying his property knows whether his house is sold or not. It's a little bit convoluted, but it gives you some latitude. It's very important that you understand the sale of property condition. It's very important that you understand those key words, remove all conditions, and he may so notify. Thank you for investing your time. Look forward to talking to you again next week.